Cannabis Control Division for the state of New Mexico. It's part one of a two-part series, and next month we'll be talking to Ian Ahrens, who is the owner of the Endo Cannabis store here in Santa Fe. Let's begin with...
Hi, this is Mish.
Hi, this is Jim.
And this is Business Bites,
where we unpack business news. Boy, there's really a lot of business news. The stock market's on a roller coaster ride. What do you call that, Mish?
Well, you call that the result of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of volatility as a result.
Why is volatility important in the stock market?
Because it measures fear. And there are other indicators, of course, that measure fear as well. But the volatility index is one that you can actually see the price of fear. And there's an old adage in the stock market is if volatility is below 20, there's no fear, things are good, that's bullish. If volatility surpasses 20, then of course we know fear is starting to tick in. And currently, as I'm talking to you here in the middle of April, volatility is at around 50. So we know that fear at this point is extremely high.
Well, one of the things that's probably less volatile right now is marijuana business, isn't it?
Well, the wonderful thing about the cannabis space that we're going to cover today, and actually this is a two-part series, is that all the volatility has been taken out of that already. In fact, complacency is probably a much better word.
We're too busy being stoned. We're going to be naturally complacent, right? So let's hear what Todd Stevens has to say about cannabis regulation in New Mexico.
Before you get started, I'd like to have a little bit more understanding of your job.
As the director of the Cannabis Control Division of the Regulation and Licensing Department of New Mexico, my number one job, in my opinion, is ensuring that compliance is set throughout the industry, that it's at a level playing field, and that we ensure products are up to the health and safety standards of New Mexico. We don't do a whole lot with sales. We don't do a whole lot with the taxes. We are the regulators to ensure that these folks are understanding, helping folks come into compliance, but we also license these business entities and investigate whether these folks meet the requirements for licensure.
What are the safety concerns that you monitor?
So we have a pretty robust testing program to ensure that these products have met a health and safety standard that is up to New Mexico. And that ensures that the folks are getting tested, regulated cannabis that they can be confident in consuming, that it does meet these health and safety standards set out by New Mexico.
A few months ago, there was a story, local story, about the fact that one of the issues was there weren't enough in terms of people going about, regulators, to really ensure that the cannabis companies here throughout New Mexico were complying with those laws. So is that still an issue?
We definitely have gotten more efficient. We doubled our staff, I believe, back in August or September of 2023. And because of that, in 2024, we were able to inspect every licensed premise in 2024 to ensure that these places are up to compliance, and again, that we're creating those fair business practices and having those products be up to the health and safety of New Mexico.
So in terms of cannabis growth, obviously we all know that we have a majority of states that are already legal medically, and also now more and more coming up recreationally. But of course, the federal government is where the bottleneck is in terms of interstate banking and descheduling, and there's been a lot of talk about that. What are your thoughts about that? Do you have any?
Obviously, we continue to look to the federal government for guidance on best practices and a little bit more clarity. Again, I think each state having an ability to bring on a program, whether through the legislature or through a popular vote, is an awesome thing to take an industry that used to be in the dark or an illicit industry and bring it to the light, regulate it, tax it, and again, ensure that products are meeting the health and safety standards of each state. I'm not sure how the federal government will go. We don't really get any insight as regulators from the federal government, but any clarity, I think, would be helpful for any state or any of my counterparts in any other states.
And in terms of revenue, just for the state, I mean, it's been a win thus far, right, in terms of tax collection and getting extra money that's being put to better use, like for schools and things like that. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about the tax. I can't get into too much detail. We work hand in hand with the Taxation and Revenue Department. But obviously, we've crossed $1 billion sales threshold for retail sales. There's roughly a 12% excise tax imposed on adult use cannabis sales in New Mexico. So some simple math, you can kind of come to the figure of over $100 million has been created kind of out of thin air that the state would not have had prior with the legalization of cannabis. And we run our office on about $8 million.
How much has it grown in the past 3 years? Do you have those figures?
I mean, we have crossed over, $1.1 billion in adult use through February of this year. We're at little under half a billion. That's with a B for medical. And it seems to be, a 3-year program that's generating $1 billion in revenue. I think that would be considered successful.
That's awesome. And so another question, this is where my interest lies in trying to determine whether or not we will get federal cooperation under this new administration, is knowing how strong the lobbying market is. I was just wondering, in New Mexico, as a potential indicator, are there other types of publicly traded companies, particularly maybe in tobacco or alcohol, that have expressed any kind of interest, without having to get specific, in investing in the future of cannabis and what it could do if it does become more federally legal?
I don't know of any publicly traded companies or large companies that the average American would know that is interested in coming to New Mexico. I think the uncertainty at the federal level really keeps out those larger companies that are probably a little adverse to risk, and why you continue to see either small mom and pops or locally owned companies stay in the state. But I have not had Pepsi or Anheuser-Busch, to my knowledge, reach out to the RLD or the CCD here in New Mexico, and I haven't heard that from any of my counterparts in other states either.
I think that was interesting, Mish. In reflecting on Todd's comments, let's talk a little bit about medical marijuana, which we both think is really one of the huge growth areas for marijuana and why marijuana is likely to increase. About 90% of all Americans do believe that medical marijuana should be legalized. So what's the importance of medical marijuana?
Well, number one is we have not just 90% of the Americans that have been polled, but we have 39 states that are already legal for medical marijuana. And the president himself has come out in favor of legalization for medical marijuana.
Really?
Yes, he has. In print, there's a direct quote from a publication that I was reading recently called The National Pulse, where he says, "I believe it is time to end needless arrests and incarcerations for personal use." So that's even beyond just medical.
Recreational use.
Yeah, but he also believes that we should be doing the descheduling from a Schedule 1, which is basically putting cannabis on the same level as heroin, to a Schedule 3, which would be more like a ketamine. So you would still need your medical card, and it would still be a prescription base. But at the same time, he feels that if we do that and we pass the interstate banking laws that right now prohibit that from happening, that actually would give us what he calls common sense laws that would allow us to do more research on the benefits of medical marijuana.
That's really business news, isn't it?
That's huge. That's huge, because it just goes to show you that everybody is complicated, including presidents.
One of the things that is a problem in terms of medical marijuana is that because it's a Class 1 drug in the United States, it's very difficult to do research on it. So are there other nations doing medical research?
Absolutely. In fact, Israel is the global leader in cannabis research, which of course is no surprise considering how advanced they are just in biotechnology. But also Canada, Czech Republic, the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, all of these countries, even we've got a little bit of Australia in there as well. All of these countries, including Germany, are all involved with medical research for the uses of cannabis. And so that, once again, puts the United States kind of behind the 8 ball.
I heard that one study from Australia found that marijuana use, cannabis was very good for PTSD. I've also heard that that's one of the reasons you can get it in New Mexico. So there's that. There's been some research that it can help with insomnia. That's still, but it'd be nice to have more research on that.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important that they finally get this rescheduling done and get rid of this, as not only from the criminality aspect, like what Trump said, but also from the medical benefits from it. Of course, we all know that we've heard about the opioid crisis in this country for years, and is research that exists that the use of cannabis actually is a great antidote to opiate addiction.
From a personal perspective, you know someone quite well who uses medical marijuana for pain management.
Absolutely. My own mom, actually, she's 91. She got her medical card. She had a series of opioids that just made her loopy. They don't give it actually to seniors that age anymore because they know the fact that they could fall or, pass out, die, whatever. And so she got her medical card. She takes some medical edibles, and it helps her pain tremendously.
For those of you who have come late into the Business Bites show, today we are talking about the marijuana business in New Mexico. We did an interview with Todd Stevens with the Cannabis Control Division. In the next segment, we talked to Todd Stevens about some of the potential opportunities in the state of New Mexico in growing cannabis. How many cannabis growers are there in New Mexico?
We've got 400 producers, which are normal, what we consider a standalone producer or someone that can grow up to 20,000 plants. They pay a $5 fee for each plant, as well as a licensing fee and what we call a premise fee. We also have a very unique program that a lot of states look at us and ask a lot of questions and are very interested at, is our micro producers. In a lot of states, people who want to get into the industry need upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars, to open a cannabis business. And the barrier of entry is very high and the number is very limited. Our legislature decided in legalization to create a very equitable program. So for a very small fee of a couple of $1,000s, you're able to grow 200 mature cannabis plants. You don't have to pay that individual plant count fee. And this allows for a lot of equity and a lot of small mom and pops or local third, fourth, fifth generation New Mexicans to chase their dream of owning a business or, owning more specifically a cannabis business.
How many micro producers do you have approximately?
About approximately 675, I believe, was the last count we did. It's also important to note that these numbers, not all of them are operational. Some of them will get a license. Then, that's the first step. Then possibly look at maybe getting some more investors. I know from my past, a lot of folks won't give you that second investment until you're licensed. So some of the licensees might not be active currently with the hopes of growing, getting a little bit more capital and being able to open up a grow that they can be proud of. Again, the micro producer kind of program that New Mexico created continues to be a very unique program that, on a small scale, 200 plants, if done right, specifically on an indoor grow, you could do what we call a perpetual harvest. So it's 200 mature plants. You could be growing, mature plants and cycling them through and have a very successful business. And some of our micro producers are very successful and are doing quite well. Some of them have upgraded to a standalone, which would be, the ability to grow more plants as they expand. But the equity and the ability to really get an opportunity to kind of put your foot in the door without wagering your entire future is something that I think a lot of states, when I talk to them, are very interested in because they've really struggled to get their local mom and pop, small business owners into cannabis. And you see a lot of larger entities that have a lot of larger capital really crowd those spaces. And we're very proud of the fact that we have local New Mexicans chasing their dream.
I just have one last question. Jim and I are very proud to be living in New Mexico, and we love all the progressive attitude and everything you just told us about the future. I myself am 100% convinced that at some point, and I think that's the big question mark of when, this will finally be legal on a federal level because of the money that the government is leaving on the table currently, not just with the product and the distribution and the marketing and the packaging and the advertising and all of that, but from the tax revenue as well. I know that's going to happen at some point. So I was just curious. Well, of course, this is just an educated guess. What percentage of chance do you think that might happen? And do you have any sense of how long that might take?
No, unfortunately, kind of like you, it would be all speculative. But I think, as you mentioned earlier, about the number of states that either have a medical program or an adult use program, I think at some point it is more of a when, not an if. If you have 50 states that eventually have some sort of medical program. Right now, cannabis is federally banned. There's going to have to likely be a change made, and I think that would be an awesome opportunity for New Mexico to, again, take advantage of those micro producers. We're very proud of our chili here in New Mexico, and it's a unique kind of thing, similar to California and their wineries. I could see a world, I don't know when, but I could see a world where people come to New Mexico because we have so many small batch, small growers that you get a much more unique experience here in New Mexico. And New Mexico could be a place that cannabis tourism flourishes even after federal legalization, because people are wanting to come to see the unique small micro grows, kind of similar to microbreweries, decades ago when that started to take off in Colorado and New Mexico as well.
It sure seems to me that Todd seems bullish about marijuana growing in New Mexico. Let's speculate a little bit ourselves about where some other business opportunities may lie in the marijuana business. Some of the drink companies are adding CBD to their drinks, and it comes from hemp.
Well, hemp is perfectly legal.
Correct.
And has so many uses. So yes, that could be some level of foreshadowing of, at the very least, at how willing big corporations are to pounce on this once they can. And it makes you wonder, again, going back to even to just pharmaceutical companies, how much lobbying there may be going on to pass this law. And if they know they have an administration, like we just saw with Trump's quote, that's pro-medical cannabis, let's talk about where you might look. So not only would you look at certain companies, especially at this point, United States biotech companies, because of the potential tariffs on pharmaceuticals. Right. So what we're seeing is if the drink companies are also already circling the wagon through CBD and hemp, which of course is totally legal, I would take that as a sign that they would be the first to pounce on creating drinks that are actually with THC and so forth and so on, whatever that packaging looks like. And that would mean you want to look at biotech companies, that especially American biotech companies, because we know that tariffs might hit the pharmaceuticals from outside of this country. You would look at the beverage companies like a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi or an Anheuser-Busch that Todd had mentioned. Certainly you would want to look at some of the tobacco companies like Philip Morris. And then beyond that, clearly by the time those corporations get involved, we like to look at MSOS, which is an exchange-traded fund, which means that it is a way that you can invest potentially in the future of the medical industry, medical cannabis, and even recreational cannabis industry, through this fund that essentially is a basket of already recognized companies in the cannabis space, so you get exposure to the whole industry in essence. And currently that's been trading just over $2 a share. This was something that was trading much, much higher. It was over $50 at one point. So the question really is at this point now, even if you didn't want to invest in that, it might be a really good thing to track if we start to see buying coming in. Then perhaps we're close to everything changing in terms of the federal law.
I think with marijuana legalization, it'll be a Wild West entrepreneurship field fest, because companies will emerge just with CBD. And CBD can do a lot. And now there's different types of CBD. With medical research catching on, we have no idea at this point in time what could be done. with marijuana, especially in the medical field? No idea.
Well, this was what blows my mind, is that if we are all about, in this current administration, bringing things to the United States, onshoring, using our own natural resources, from oil to coal to food, whatever it is, we have left so much money there with something that we can grow in the United States and manufacture in the United States and distribute in the United States.
I often wonder, when is the state of Texas going to realize that it loses a lot of money from its neighboring states in cannabis sales? And when are they going to realize that finally, like you're saying with the federal government, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when Texas, which doesn't appear ready to do it, will jump on the bandwagon like all the other states and realize this is a good source of revenue.
Absolutely, and all we have to do in Texas is take out the E and put in the A, and now we have taxes, and that's another huge revenue stream.
Especially in the state of Texas, where there's a huge population and they get a lot of tourists. So that's something else to think about. Do you have any final comments, Mish?
Well, considering our conversation that we had with Todd Stevens, working from a government level in New Mexico, and listening to him and seeing how optimistic he is, not just about the fact that they're doing what they can to ensure safe products to consumers, but also things like the micro growers and just the whole industry in and of itself, what it could do for New Mexico in the future. I think that's something that we can listen to as a representation of the other states obviously feeling that same way. So I think that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is, like I said, really is that this is a revenue stream that at some point will be recognized. From a medical standpoint, this is not pie in the sky. These are real medical benefits, which with a descheduling will allow us to do more research on. And finally, as an individual, besides access to it for your own medical or recreational uses, as an investment, it's something that one might consider as sort of a lottery ticket for the future.
I think my biggest takeaway from this whole experience has been medical marijuana. As I said, to me, medical marijuana is going to be a field fest. We're going to find out that it's very useful for so many things to make all of our lives better. We just don't know what they are yet because it's been so difficult to do medical research. And I think it will eventually be legalized in the United States.
I haven't spoken to one person who doesn't believe that. So there you go. You have a huge public consensus. We just need our government.
For KSFR, this is Walkabout James Werbel signing off with Mish on Business Bites. We had a lot of fun.